Some cases refuse to stay in the past. Not because we don't know what happened, but because what happened cannot be undone. In September of 1993, 17-year-old Sara Wisnosky was 2 weeks from turning 18. She was a freshman at Old Dominion University. New campus, new friends, new freedom. The kind of beginning that feels like the first real chapter of adulthood. And then she was gone. By the next day, she would be found dead in Norfolk's Lafayette River, and very quickly, the story of Sara Wisnosky stopped being a missing student story and became something else entirely. A homicide investigation that narrowed fast, a prosecution that moved with confidence, and a capital case that ended with an execution. But here's the part that keeps this case alive, even decades later. It isn't that people argue about whether Sara was murdered, because they don't. It isn't that her death was somehow ambiguous, because it wasn't. The controversy lives in what the case became after the fact, how it's been used as a reference point in death penalty debate, in legal scholarship, and in the specific question of what happens when the stakes are irreversible. And later, the courts acknowledge that the defense didn't do what it was supposed to do. That tension is hard to sit with, and it's why this case still has gravity. Now, we are going to be responsible here. At some point in this series, we have to confront the question people ask in contested capital cases. Did he do it? And we will. Fully, carefully, and without pretending the question doesn't exist. But I'm also going to be clear about where I stand as we enter this story. Derek Barnaby was convicted. He was sentenced to death. He was executed. And based on what is known and what was presented, I believe that he killed Sara Wisnosky. And I don't want this framed like a routine relationship violence episode. This isn't a story about a couple falling into a pattern. This isn't a story about mutual volatility. This is a story about predation, about a 27-year-old man who embedded himself into a student world, constructed credibility where he didn't earn it, and used that credibility to gain access. Sara was 17, a freshman, new to the pace of campus life, still learning which instincts to trust and which social signals to take at face value. Barnaby wasn't new to anything. He was older, more practiced, and, according to the people who encountered him, extremely effective at being whoever he needed to be in the moment. That's what I want you listening for from the start, because one of the most disturbing realities of cases like this is how easy it can be for a person to pass, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as someone who looks close enough to belong. A few conversations, a party, a nickname, a confident story about who you are, claim to membership that you didn't earn, a circle of people who see you repeatedly and start assuming you've been vetted by someone else. That's how legitimacy gets built in real time, especially in early 1990s campus culture. And it matters here because Sara didn't meet a masked intruder in a parking lot. She met someone who positioned himself inside the social bloodstream of a university, inside the spaces where trust gets handed out quickly, simply because everyone is young and everyone is trying to belong. And then there's the other layer, Virginia in the early 1990s. This was a state with a fast-moving capital punishment system. Death sentences were not rare. Appeals were tight. Post-conviction relief was difficult. And the margin of error, culturally and legally, was treated like something the system could manage because the system believed it was getting it right. That belief matters because it shapes momentum. When investigators feel that they have early clarity, the investigation accelerates. Leads don't get ignored out of malice. They get ignored because the case stops needing them. The story tightens, a focus narrows. The early hour that passes makes the original direction feel more confirmed, even before the evidence has been tested in the courtroom. That's not corruption, that's human systems under pressure. And this case is also tied to another kind of momentum, the rise of forensic certainty. In the early 1990s, juries were being introduced to forensic techniques that carried out an aura of finality. The language in court often didn't sound like probability, it sounded like proof. Prosecutors leaned on that confidence, jurors observed it, and defense attorneys sometimes were not equipped to challenge it with the force and the clarity that the Constitution demands. This is where Sara Wisnosky becomes more than a single case file, because years later, in reviewing Barnaby's conviction, courts and legal observers would point to serious deficiencies in his defense. Not minor mistakes, critical failures. Failures that, in many people's minds, should mean something different when the punishment is death. And yet, the conviction stood, the sentence stood, and the execution happened. So you end up with a case that holds two realities at once. A young woman was murdered, and the system that punished the man convicted of killing her later faced credible criticism about whether the adversarial process did its job at the level it was supposed to, especially in a capital trial. That's the space we're entering. But make no mistake, this begins with Sara, a teenager building a life, a freshman learning the rhythm of independence, a girl navigating a campus in a city without the safety net we take for granted now. No smartphones, no location sharing, no instant chats, no, I'll just drop a pin. Just word of mouth, dorm phones, a roommate check-in system, and a plan for the night. And somewhere in that normal, ordinary world, a much older man inserted himself, smoothly, convincingly, and with a level of manipulation that, in hindsight, looks less like charm and more like strategy. That's what we're going to unravel in this series. Not with theatrics, not with inflated language, with structure, with clarity, and with facts. And with an honest eye toward how a case could be both brutal and simple on the surface, while still becoming controversial in the machinery that follows. So tonight, we start where every case would start. The place, with the people, and with the social environment that made access possible. Because before a trial ever begins, before arguments, before experts, before appeals, a story starts to form. And once it forms, the rest of the system either confirms it or fights to change it. That's what we're here to examine. This is the murder of Sara Wisnosky. Hey, Angela, how's it going tonight?
Hi, John. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Anything new and exciting happening in your world?
Define exciting.
I don't know.
Probably not.
No?
Probably not.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the end of the week.
This is true.
That's exciting.
That is exciting.
So, do you know a lot about this case?
I don't.
All right.
I don't know much about it.
It's something. So you ready to jump into it? It is freaking something. I'll tell you what.
Is this close enough? Am I loud enough?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Okay.
So welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we examine the cases that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm your co-host, Angela, and together we step into the darker corners of human behavior, where familiarity, access, and trust collide with violence. And the truth isn't always what it first appears to be.
Each episode, we take a careful, evidence-driven look at cases that refuse to fade, not to sensationalize them, but to understand them. Because behind every headline is a real person, and behind every investigation are questions that deserve honest answers.
These are stories about people whose voices were taken from them, and about the systems, decisions, and evidence that shape what the world is told afterwards.
This is part one of our investigation into the murder of Sara Wisnosky. Sara was a 17-year-old freshman at Old Dominion University who was last known to be with someone that she trusted, and who was later found murdered in Norfolk, Virginia. In this first part, we're going to focus on who Sara was, the world she was navigating, and the sequence of events that placed her in harm's way.
This episode isn't about shock value, it's about context, how proximity matters, how timelines begin to form, and how early assumptions can shape everything that follows. Understanding those first steps is essential before the forensic evidence ever enters the picture.
So before we dive in, take a moment to support the show in the simplest way possible. If you're listening or watching right now, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a review. Hit that follow button, give a thumbs up, ring the bell, whatever your platform allows.
Those small actions really do matter, and they help this work reach more people and make sure stories like Sarah's don't quietly disappear.
This episode includes discussions of sexual violence, homicide, and the death of a minor. Please take care of yourselves while listening. All right, so let's begin. Angela, you have some location information to tell us about, don't you?
I do, and it looks like a lot.
It's a bit.
Yeah, he's given me some stuff to say. So, before we get any further into this case, we need to talk about where this story begins. And like I always say, when we talk about location, we're talking about more than just a pin on the map. We're talking about the kind of place it is, how it grew, and what daily life looked like at the time. So first, let's start with Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk is one of the oldest cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia, with roots going all the way back to the 1600s. English settlers were establishing plantations in the area as early as the 1630s, and by 1705, holy crap, we're going back there.
Yeah,
Norfolk.
This is like Salem witch trials.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Norfolk was officially incorporated as a town by 1705. It quickly grew into a major port city thanks to its location along the Elizabeth River and its access to the Chesapeake Bay. Over the centuries, Norfolk became a hub for shipbuilding, trade, and later military operations. By the time you get to the 20th century, the city is firmly tied to the U.S. Navy and Naval Station Norfolk, eventually becoming the largest naval base in the world. Now, I always like to look at the census numbers because they tell us a lot about how places change over time. In 1790, dang, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Norfolk reported just under 3,000 residents.
And, I mean, think about how freaking big that is for 1790.
For 1790, that's why I'm blown away. I saw 3,000. I was like, what? In 1790?
Yeah, I mean, we're a itty bitty baby country at that point,
Yeah.
you know?
Just tiny. I don't even think, not going to say it. Anyway, by 1900, that number had grown to about 46,000. Then came the major population boom tied to World War II and post-war expansion. By 1960, Norfolk hit its peak population at just over 305,000 people. After that, like a lot of American cities, it started to shrink a bit as suburbs expanded. By the 1990 census, which is the closest one to our case, Norfolk had a reported population of about 261,000 residents. They shrunk a tiny bit.
A little bit.
So this is not a small town. It's not rural. It's a full-scale city with long-established neighborhoods, commercial corridors, military housing, waterfront industry, and everything that comes with that. Norfolk has also produced more than a few notable names. Music fans might recognize Timbaland, nice, who grew up in the area. Sports fans might recognize NBA player Joe Smith, and the region as a whole has a deep cultural footprint that goes well beyond what people sometimes assume they hear when they hear Navy Town. Now let's zoom in just a bit, because this case doesn't just take place in Norfolk. It takes place inside Norfolk. Apparently there's a difference. Let's find out.
There's a difference.
That's where Old Dominion University comes in. Old Dominion University, or ODU, started in 1930 as a small extension campus of the College of William and Mary. It was originally created to offer teacher training and engineering courses to local residents during the Great Depression. At the time, it served about 200 students and operated out of a former elementary school. Over the next few decades, it grew steadily. In 1962, it became independent as Old Dominion College, and in 1969, it officially became Old Dominion University. By the early 1990s, by the late 1900s, by the early 1990s, when Sara Wisnosky arrived on campus, ODU enrolled roughly 16,500 students. That number had been climbing throughout the 70s and 80s, and the school was transitioning from a largely commuter campus into a more residential university. This is important because ODU was not a closed or isolated campus. It sits directly along Hampton Boulevard, woven into the surrounding city. Dorms, academic buildings, residential streets, apartments, bars, and off-campus houses all exist side by side. Students didn't, quote, leave campus in a dramatic way. They just kept walking. For someone arriving as a freshman in the early 1990s, that environment could feel exciting, independent, grown up, and very normal. ODU's student body has always included a wide mix of people: traditional students, commuters, military-affiliated students, older students returning to school. Seeing people in their 20s on or around campus was not unusual at all. That blending is part of what defined the campus at the time. Now, as far as crime goes, and I promise I'll keep this brief, Norfolk in the early 1990s was experiencing the same national crime trends as many U.S. cities. Violent crime rates were higher than they are today, but ODU itself functioned like most mid-sized urban universities of that era. Crime reporting systems were different. Campus alerts didn't exist the way they do now. Safety conversations were far less formalized. Students relied heavily on routine, familiarity, and social networks to navigate their world. And that's the backdrop here. This wasn't a campus cut off from the city, and it wasn't a city unaware of its students. It was a place where the two overlapped constantly, in housing, in social spaces, and in everyday life. For a 17-year-old freshman, that environment likely felt like opportunity more than risk. And nothing about that feeling would have seemed unusual at the time. So when we talk about what happened next, it's important to remember this case didn't begin in a shadowy corner of a dangerous place. It began in ordinary spaces, in a city and a campus that thousands of students moved through every day without incident. And with that foundation in mind, I'll hand it back to John to talk about the person who brought us here, Sara Wisnosky.
Thank you, Angela.
You're very welcome.
And, you said it in that, and I'll say it really throughout this thing, and it's a little bit crazy because 1993 was not that long ago.
It wasn't.
But the difference between 1993 and now, especially for a 17-year-old,
it was so close yet so far away.
It's like night and day.
Yeah.
It's like freaking night and day difference. So before we talk about college, relationships, or the night Sara Wisnosky was killed, we need to talk about what we actually know about her life before she ever arrived in Norfolk. And just as importantly, we need to talk about what we don't know. Sara's full name was Sara Jean Wisnosky. She was born in 1975 and grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia, where her family lived and where she is buried today. Public records identify her parents as Carl J. and Patricia Antis Wisnosky. Beyond that, the documentary record becomes very quiet. That silence isn't an oversight in research. It's a feature of this case. I have gone looking deeply for verified information about her childhood, her family dynamics, her early interests, and her life before college. Court records, appellate opinions, major newspaper coverage, advocacy summaries, archival reporting, even true crime freaking documentaries, which are very few on this case.
Yeah.
But they overwhelmingly focus on the crime, the investigation, and the legal battle that followed. I mean, if you want to learn about the freaking asshat in this case, Oh, there's all kinds of shit about him.
Yeah.
But there's almost nothing about this girl. And I don't know how much of that is he stole the spotlight or how much her parents were just like, we don't want no part of this. Yeah. I don't know.
Because lack of deep diving is not a sentence I would say about you.
No, this one is, you'll find out.
If you can find it, you'll find it.
I tried my very best, but I could not find a lot about this girl.
So somebody who used to know her, please tell us. We need to know.
Yeah. They do not preserve a detailed portrait of the person that she was before that moment. There are no verified accounts of her elementary school years, no public descriptions of her siblings or extended family relationships, no anecdotes about hobbies, sports, church involvement, or community activities, no interviews with childhood friends, and that absence matters. Sara is consistently described as a 17-year-old freshman from Lynchburg, a phrase that reduces her entire pre-college life to a line item. It tells us where she came from, but not who she was day by day.
And from what we just noticed, can be described of thousands of people.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
It's not fair.
Yeah. Unless that's where parents wanted it, in which case it's 100% fair.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. But I mean, in the world of her soul.
Well, and the paradox is interesting. And, we do talk about this. I've said this about...
Sorry, I got you on a tangent.
Yeah, you did. But I've said this about multiple cases where it's like, I did my best. I can't find shit. But part of that, I think, is this paradox between not freaking long ago in 1993 and today. And I bring that up with... because this is based around a university and everything, I'm going to bring up the conversation again about the Idaho college murders that just happened not very long ago.
Yeah.
Where you've got, of course, we had multiple students all killed at the same time. It's a big story. But you've got podcasters like us. You've got all these freaking demons that are running around out there with their little TikTok channels that were like, and I talked about it. We've talked about this before, but we're like showing up at the crime scene and doing all this horrible shit where in 1993, you didn't have none of that.
No.
None of it.
Yeah.
If you didn't see it in the paper or watch it on the nightly news,
you didn't know.
You didn't know.
Yeah.
So there wasn't, and there's good and bad to that. Like I said, all the douchebags that show up at crime scenes and sensationalize the murder of children, that pisses me off. But on the other side of the story, now you've got a bunch of, and I mean a bunch of really solid podcasts out there, especially podcasts, but even like the video version on YouTube and a lot of really solid independent journalists that do a damn good job. I think there's way more of those than the other part, but they add a lot to it because they're people like me and you. They're people that are digging into these stories right away and getting the information out there. So there's just a lot more available. None of that existed at this time.
Yeah.
But what we can say with confidence about Sara is she completed her school in Lynchburg and graduated from Heritage High School in the spring of 1993. A class ring engraved with her initials, SJW, was recovered with her body and cited in official materials as confirmation of her identity and her recent high school graduation. The ring is one of the few tangible links that we have to her life before college. There's no publicly available records detailing her academic performance, extracurricular involvement, or future plans during high school. No mentions of sports teams, no clubs, no awards, no disciplinary issues, no red flags. And that in itself tells us something important. In most cases, where a young person's background becomes a part of a criminal narrative, the record is filled with labels. Troubled, rebellious, difficult, reckless. None of that appears here. Sara's pre-college life is not framed as chaotic or unstable in any source. Instead, it is largely unremarkable in the truest sense of the word. She appears to have lived a normal teenage life in Lynchburg, completed high school on schedule, and prepared to leave home for college in the fall. There's no evidence that she was running from anything, hiding from anything, or struggling in any ways that attracted institutional attention. Her story before college is not missing because it was dramatic. It's missing because it was ordinary. And ordinary lives are rarely documented until something unordinary, something terrible happens.
Mm-hmm.
By the time Sara left Lynchburg in late summer of 1993, she was still legally a minor. She was 2 weeks away from her 18th birthday. She had just completed high school. She was transitioning from her family home into the first independent chapter of her life. That transition, common, expected, and deeply human, is the last clearly documented shift that we see before the narrative of her life is overtaken by the narrative of her death. What comes next in this story is the version of Sara that exists inside college records, police records, witness testimonies, and court filings. But before any of that, she was simply a young woman from Lynchburg, a daughter, a high school graduate, a teenager standing on the edge of adulthood. And the fact that so little of her early life survives in the public record is not a reflection of who she was. It's a reflection of how easily a life can be reduced to a case once violence enters the frame. That is why it matters to say her name here, without inference, without embellishment, and without rewriting her past through the lens of what came after. Sara Jean Wisnosky existed long before September of 1993, and she deserves to be remembered that way. So when Sara arrived at Old Dominion University in late August of 93, she was standing at one of those rare thresholds in life where everything feels possible at once. And that period of your life goes so fast.
Mm-hmm.
She was 17 years old, young even by freshman standards.
Yeah.
But that wasn't unusual then. In the early 90s, students left home for college at 17 quite frequently. It wasn't considered reckless. It wasn't controversial. It was simply part of the expected rhythm of growing up. And I didn't go to college when I graduated high school, but I moved out when I was 17, got my own place. And I mean, it was different.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the period where people lived in their parents' basements until they were 50.
Right.
This was the period where you couldn't wait to get the hell out, and you did it as soon as you possibly could.
Yeah.
And Sara was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She graduated from high school just months earlier and moved into Rogers Hall, a residence hall overlooking Cauley Bay. Dorm life was immediate and immersive. Doors were open, music drifted down hallways, people wandered in and out, introducing themselves, borrowing things, laughing loudly at nothing in particular. It was college in its most recognizable form. Sara shared a room with Nikki Van Belkom, and like many first semester roommates, they fell into an easy routine quickly. They coordinated plans. They checked in with each other. They made loose arrangements to meet up after class or in the evenings, knowing those plans might change. That flexibility wasn't carelessness. It was independence taking shape. And remember, there were no smartphones, no constant location updates. Staying connected required effort. Phone calls mattered. Notes mattered. And Sara was good about that. If she was going to stay somewhere else for the night, she let her roommate know. That detail tells us something important. Sara wasn't disappearing into college life. She was just navigating it. And by all accounts, Sara was happy at Old Dominion. Not guarded, not homesick, happy. One description used later says that she was deliriously happy to be at school. Others describe her as friendly, sociable, and quickly popular. She wasn't shrinking into the background. She was doing what so many first-year students do in those early weeks, saying yes to invitations, meeting new people, and letting the excitement of independence carry her forward. ODU itself played a role in this energy. Old Dominion, in the early 90s, was an urban campus woven directly into the surrounding city. Students didn't feel tucked away, they felt connected. You could walk from dorms to classes to restaurants to off-campus housing without ever feeling like you've crossed any kind of a boundary. And for someone young and eager, That openness felt like possibility. Sara moved easily through those spaces. She made friends with her dorm floor. She met people through classes and social gatherings. She spent time off campus as well as on it. None of that set her apart from her peers. If anything, it marked her as well-adjusted. It is also important to say this clearly. There is nothing that suggests that Sara was reckless, troubled, or out of control during those first weeks in college. No reports of any disciplinary issues, no warnings, no sense that anyone around her believed that she was in danger or spiraling or anything. She was a freshman doing freshman things, figuring out who she was when no one else was watching. And while it's true that 17 is young, youth alone is not a flaw. It doesn't imply poor judgment. It doesn't mean her parents failed her. It doesn't mean she didn't belong there. In 93, college was understood as a place where you learned how to navigate adulthood, not something you waited to do once you were fully equipped. Sara arrived at ODU at exactly the right moment in her life. What makes this part of her story so important is it reminds us who she was before fear enters the frame, before suspicion, before violence, before her name becomes attached to a case file. She was excited. She was social. She was building a life that had just begun to open. The world she was stepping into was loud, messy, and thrilling in the way only early adulthood can be. And she moved through it with optimism. Not because she was naive, but because optimism is how young people are supposed to meet the future. The darkness in this story has not arrived yet. Right now, Sara Wisnosky is simply a teenager on her own for the first time, learning how big the world is and trusting that it will meet her with the same good faith that she brings to it. That trust was not a mistake. It was the most human thing about her. Now, in the first weeks of college, social worlds form quickly. People don't just meet once, they collide repeatedly in dorm hallways, at parties, through mutual friends, and familiar spaces that start to feel routine long before anyone really knows each other. That's how Sara Wisnosky met Derek Barnaby. Although she didn't know that, because Derek introduced himself to her and everyone else at ODU as Serafino Barbie, or Surf, because he's a dumbass. Though,
Oh, but he's so cool, don't you know?
I hate this guy so freaking much.
I know, I can see it, but Surf, come on.
Yeah, what a freaking douchebag. Sorry if your name's Surf. If your parents gave you that name, that's one thing. If you gave it to yourself, you're a douchebag. Throughout this story, I might refer to him by either name, and I want to clear up any confusion because it's the same guy.
Or you might just call him Asshat. We know.
Probably.
We understand
I'm
that.
going to call him Asshat.
We understand that.
But no matter how I refer to him, it's all the same guy. And as we're going to discover, his name was not the only thing that he lied about. There's no single documented first meeting, no fixed moment where paths clearly crossed. Instead, the record suggests something more ordinary and more typical of early college life. Sara met Derek, or Surf, through the social current around Old Dominion's fraternity scene.
I can't take that seriously.
Surf?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was already there, present at off-campus gatherings, embedded in fraternity-adjacent spaces, and moving easily among students who assumed that he belonged. He was confident, talkative, comfortable in those rooms in a way that made his presence feel natural rather than questioned. And that mattered. Because in environments like this, belonging is often established by repetition. If someone shows up often enough, if they're recognized, greeted, waved in, then legitimacy quietly follows. People stop asking who you are and start assuming that you've already been vetted by someone else. And Surf understood that dynamic well. He introduced himself with ease. He talked big. He told stories that placed him squarely inside the fraternity world. Stories about his past, his experience, his connections. And to many students, especially the younger ones, he came across as someone who'd already figured college out. To Sara, newly arrived and still learning the landscape, that confidence likely read as familiarity. Their relationship moved fast, not in a dramatic way. And I just got to say this, like, I get, if a 17-year-old goes off to college or something like that, and she falls for a 19-year-old, maybe even a 20-year-old or something.
Mm-hmm.
And, on the technical side, that's like a statutory rape situation if they engage in sex or something, but it's completely freaking normal. And they could have even been dating for years at that age gap. He's 27.
Yeah, that's...
He is freaking this is pedophilia.
Yeah. In that instance.
Yeah. Anyway. I don't like this guy.
Couldn't tell.
Yeah. So anyway, the relationship moved fast, and not in a dramatic or cinematic way, but in the compressed way that relationships often do during the opening weeks of college. Time feels elastic, and a few days can feel like weeks. Seeing the same person in multiple gatherings creates a sense of closeness that hasn't yet been tested. Sara began spending time with Derek, Surf, I hate both his names, at the off-campus house on West 48th Street, a place that functioned as both a residence and a social hub. It was loud, it was busy, people came and went, music played late, faces became familiar quickly. Within that space, Sara and Derek settled into a routine. She would leave her dorm to go there. She would call her roommate if she planned to stay the night. This wasn't secrecy, it was communication. It was her applying the same norms that she used everywhere else in her life. To the people around them, the relationship looked consensual and mutual. They were seen together often. They interacted comfortably. Sara didn't appear withdrawn or isolated. She wasn't cutting herself off from her friends or disappearing into one person's world. She remained socially present, moving between spaces, maintaining connections. That visibility mattered because it shaped how others interpreted what they saw. At the same time, Surf stood out. And not because he was invisible, but because he was a freaking loudmouth piece of shit asshole. I hate this guy. He talked about himself constantly. He talked about women constantly. He framed interactions as conquests, experiences, stories to be repeated. To some people, that bravado was entertaining. To others, it was exhausting. But either way, it drew attention. Among students and fraternity members, impressions of him were mixed. Some were taken in by the performance, the stories, the confidence, the way he seemed to command rooms. Others saw something artificial underneath it. They described him later as over the top, insincere, always playing a role. But early on, those impressions existed side by side without resolution. And that's important because environments like this don't immediately resolve contradictions. People file them away. Someone can be charming and unsettling at the same time, loud and off-putting, confident and insecure. Those contradictions don't always trigger alarm. Often, they're normalized. Sara's place in this dynamic was not unusual. She was younger than most people around her, but she wasn't treated as fragile. She was welcomed, included, she laughed, she participated, she appeared comfortable navigating the social scene that she'd entered. Nothing about her behavior suggests any kind of fear. If anything, what people noticed most was Surf's need to perform. He talked about their relationship publicly. He talked about sex publicly. He talked about Sara in ways that made others feel uncomfortable. Not because of violence, but because of objectifying her and status seeking. Those moments didn't yet read as danger. They read as immaturity, ego, posturing, being an asshat. And that's where early warning signs often hide, in behavior that feels unpleasant but not yet threatening, in dynamics that feel awkward rather than alarming, in relationships that move quickly but don't immediately appear harmful. By the time people began to notice tension, small moments of dismissal, irritation, bruised pride, the relationship was already established as normal within the group. And we're talking about a short period of time.
Right.
So Sara and Surf were a known pairing. They had routines, they shared spaces, they had visible connection, and once something becomes familiar, it becomes harder to question. At this point in the story, nothing has broken yet. There's no single incident that forces clarity, no event that demands intervention, no moment where anyone can point to and say, this is where it all went wrong. There's only momentum. Two people moving fast in a social environment that rewards confidence, repetition, and performance, especially when no one is yet looking for danger. That'll change, but for now, this is where the relationship sits. Newly formed, highly visible, socially reinforced, and already carrying subtle imbalances that few people had reason or the language to name. The next time the tension surfaces, it won't be subtle, and it won't stay contained to a party. So before we go any further, I have to admit something.
Okay.
I grew up in Wyoming. I didn't graduate high school and go to college. I went to college years later once I was already a dad and everything. So I definitely, even at that point, I did not go to a college that had fraternities.
Right.
I didn't live in dorms. I never lived in dorms. I was never surrounded by Greek letters.
Same.
My entire understanding of the whole fraternity culture for the longest time, and almost to the point I researched this story, came from Animal House.
Okay.
And I don't know, have you seen Animal House?
Yeah, it's
John?
been a while, but yeah.
Yeah, with Belushi, it was National Lampoon's Animal House. Freaking hilarious movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know the scene, Doga.
Yes.
Yeah. John Belushi smashing a guitar for no apparent reason, sweaty chaos, drunk people pretending this all means something.
Yes.
And honestly,
It's all very deep.
I thought it was kind of exaggerated nonsense.
It was.
So the first time that I actually encountered real world fraternity stuff was years later when I lived in Colorado and I used to work jobs around the University of Colorado, Boulder. And I remember thinking, oh, this isn't satire. This is happening.
This is actually happening. Yeah.
Yeah. The toga party in this case wasn't cinematic, and it wasn't funny, and it was not charming, but it did matter. So, because this is where social dynamics become visible, where people were watching and where something shifted in how Surf treated Sara in public.
I have to tell you, I'm secretly playing a drinking game in my mind. When I see his name, I'm like, which one's it going to be? Which one's it going to be?
The party was held at the off-campus rooming
Sorry, I
house.
threw you.
That's okay. The party was held at the off-campus rooming house on West 48th Street, where Derek lived with several other young men tied to Old Dominion University.
And Tau Kappa Epsilon.
Tau Kappa Epsilon. I don't speak Greek. It was exactly what you'd expect from an early, and I want to be clear about something. I researched this to find out for sure. And this Tau Kappa Epsilon, I will talk about it a little bit later, but this is not their house. Like in some places, the fraternity actually like owns the frat house. This is not that. I think that some people, some guys that belong to the fraternity rented an off-campus house.
Yeah.
I think
Kind of like a booster club situation. Somebody's just funding it, but it doesn't belong to them.
Or not even. I think they might have just did what normal college students do and like split the rent.
Oh.
But they all belong to the fraternity. That
Okay.
type of thing.
So they built, quotes, a frat house
Right.
themselves. Okay.
Yeah, essentially, which that does happen, you know.
Right.
And even if there is a frat house, it usually doesn't house the entire fraternity all in it. several, depending on how large it is, there can be several people that live there. But, there are actually frat houses in around, and again, I haven't been around this that much, but there's a couple universities in Colorado that do have fraternities, and some of them are owned by the fraternity, but they're not like ginormous freaking mansions like you see in the movies where 150 people all live
it's
together.
Romanticized, yeah.
All of this shit. They're decent sized just houses.
Right.
So it's not like the entire fraternity lived there anyway, but I do want to be clear that the fraternity did not own this place. But it was exactly what you'd expect from an early 90s frat adjacent party. Alcohol, loud music, crowded rooms, people spilling onto the porch, and very little, if any, structure or supervision. Sara attended the party with her roommate, Nikki Van Belkom. Early in the evening, the two of them moved through the house together, talking to people, circulating, doing what college freshmen do when they're still getting their bearings in a new social world. As the night went on, Sara became intoxicated. Witnesses later described her behavior as loud and disruptive, what one account called obnoxious. That word matters because it gets weaponized later. But taken in context, it describes a drunk teenager at a crowded college party, nothing more. And I will say that I drank a lot in high school, and high schoolers are just obnoxious. And I realize she's not a high schooler, but she's that age.
It's the transition. You don't suddenly stop being obnoxious because you've graduated high school.
No. And the other thing is, and again, I couldn't find anything about her beforehand, but I have a suspicion that she was probably a really good kid. And I don't know that she had a lot of experience drinking and partying.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, those very first experiences being drunk
are very obnoxious.
An asshat than after, you know what I mean? And so I kind of suspect this is her first kind of experience partying and all that kind of stuff. So she probably was loud and
living it up, trying to figure it out.
But at some point, Nikki decided that she'd had enough and she wanted to leave. Sara refused to go with her. That decision, staying behind at the party, wasn't unusual, and it didn't raise alarms. It didn't feel dangerous at the time. Sara had been spending time at this house. She knew people there. Surf lived there. And so this all felt familiar. But what changed that night wasn't Sarah's behavior. It was Surf's. Multiple witnesses describe him as actively avoiding Sara during the party, not drifting away, not distracted, actively shunning her. He didn't stay near her. He didn't check on her. He didn't act like someone who'd invited a much younger girlfriend to a chaotic, alcohol-heavy environment. Instead, he told others that he was trying to hook up with someone else, and he made that explicit. At one point, Surf instructed a frat member, Thomas Walton, to keep Sara away from him. The words he used were not subtle. Quote, "Keep that bitch away from me," end quote. That statement wasn't private. It wasn't said in the heat of an argument between the two of them. It was said to a third party in front of others as a way of managing the situation. Public rejection, public degradation. And that matters because this wasn't a quiet relationship dispute. This was status management in a social arena. So while Derek was inside the house trying to pursue other women, Sara ended up outside on the front porch with Walton and another student, Daniel Paul Wilson. They talked, and at some point they asked her directly about Surf, what she actually thought of him, how serious things were. Sara's response was simple, quote, "He's all right, but I've had better." That wasn't a speech. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of offhand comment people make when they're drunk, disappointed, and talking honestly in a casual setting. And it might not have even been honest.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we don't know anything about their sexual history, and I'm not even going there because it doesn't matter. But there's a very real possibility that if the two were sexually involved. To what degree, we'll find out, comes up later. But if they were, it's very possible that she had lost her virginity to this douchebag. So, saying he's all right, but I've had better doesn't necessarily mean that she's sexually experienced.
Yeah.
It means he's treated me like absolute garbage tonight, so I'm going to cut him as deep as I know how to.
Exactly.
After knowing this piece of shit for like a month or whatever.
Exactly.
It's not like they have years of relationship history she can draw from and say, oh yeah, well, your dad's a drunk. Some shit like that, I mean, it's just, she didn't know anything about this guy, really.
Right.
Anyway. It was, the comment was not intended to travel outside of the three of them sitting on the porch.
But I'm assuming it did.
It did. So later that night, as the party wound down, Walton helped Sara to Derek's bedroom. Around 5 o'clock in the morning,
Great.
He left her asleep in Derek's bed. There's no record of a confrontation at that moment, no argument, no visible conflict when Sara later woke up and returned to her dorm that morning. On the surface, the night ended quietly. But what happened at that party wasn't about noise or intoxication or frat theatrics. It was about humiliation. It was about a public dismissal, followed by a private assessment that didn't flatter the image of that Surf had been projecting. And while nothing criminal happened that night, the social damage had already been done, because in spaces like this, where reputation is currency, how you are seen can matter more than what actually happened. And Surf had just been seen differently. So we'll stop here, because what happens next doesn't happen at the party. It happens in daylight, in conversation, and in the place where Derek believed his version of himself mattered the most. Now, I hope I don't bore the shit out of the listeners with this, but before we go any further, we got to pause and explain something that isn't obvious if you haven't lived inside this world.
Okay.
Because, if you're like me and you, fraternity culture is a mystery.
Yeah.
I
was a mom when I went to college, so
I don't understand this shit, and none of it makes sense. So I imagine that there's probably fraternities and sororities at UW. Outside that, nowhere in Wyoming has this shit.
Yeah, I don't even know if there are.
I don't either. I have no idea. But
somebody school us, tell us.
I don't think they exist in any community college, they're like a university structure.
Yeah.
And I think that they're in more older, traditional, I'll get into all that shit, so let me not.
Don't get ahead of yourself, John.
Yes, but so I had to figure all this shit out because I didn't understand it. So fraternity culture operates as a hierarchy, perception, and performance, and none of these are accidental. So American fraternities did not start as house parties. They began as secret societies, many of them rooted in academic and philosophical clubs in the late 18th century. Some of the earliest emerged at schools like the College of William and Mary, which later gave rise to institutions like Old Dominion, like you told us about. So over time, those societies evolved into social organizations built around brotherhood, leadership, loyalty, and status. And I don't leave sororities out, but that's not historically where it started.
Right.
It started as, of course, at the time that fraternities were started, women didn't go to college. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean? But so the last part of that matters, the loyalty and status part, because in fraternity systems, who you are is often less important than who you appear to be. Most fraternities operate through a layered internal structure. There are formal spaces where legitimacy is reinforced and informal spaces where reputation is built and tested. So those spaces serve different purposes. Formal fraternity settings, official gatherings, sanctioned meetings, organized functions are where hierarchy is publicly affirmed. Who belongs, who matters, who carries influence. These are not casual environments. They are places where image becomes currency. And what happens there carries weight. And then there's informal spaces. parties, off-campus houses, social hangouts, and those are where narratives are performed, stories are told, personas are constructed. People test how far their version of themselves will be accepted. And when those two worlds overlap, things can shift very quickly, because if a carefully maintained image is challenged in a setting that counts, the damage isn't private, it's reputational. In these systems, reputation is not abstract. It determines access, credibility, and standing. It affects whether someone is trusted, deferred to, or dismissed. And once that reputation is punctured, repairing it becomes urgent, especially for someone whose identity inside the group is built almost entirely on performance. So that's why slights that might seem trivial to an outsider, sarcasm, embarrassment, laughter, can land very differently inside a hierarchy like this. They're not just insults, they are threats to position. And that pressure does not exist in isolation. It follows people home. It colors conversations. It reshapes how interactions are interpreted.
It scars.
It scars. It lasts for good and for bad. And so this is also where age and experience quietly really matter. Because for younger students, especially freshmen, these systems can feel exciting, inclusive, and affirming. They offer instant belonging, familiar faces, and a sense of being inside something. But for someone older, embedded in that world without fully belonging, the stakes are different. Control of narrative becomes survival. Approval becomes validation. And rejection, especially public rejection, becomes destabilizing. None of that means that harm is inevitable. But it does mean that when conflict arises inside a hierarchy built on image and status, the emotional weight of that conflict is often far heavier than it appears from the outside. The framework is essential to understanding what happens next, because what unfolds after the toga party does not occur in a vacuum. It unfolds inside a system where perception is power, reputation is fragile, and humiliation, once it enters the room, does not simply fade away. So now that we understand how that world works, we can step forward into what followed. And let me just say, I might have put it in later in the episode, and if I did, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but in researching this whole fraternity thing, and again, if you belong to a fraternity or a sorority, I don't mean to offend you, but for somebody like a dumbass Wyoming cowboy that's never been around this shit, I felt like I was researching the Hells Angels or the Sons of Anarchy episode or something. It's like they have pledges.
It's guarded and
Yeah, they have pledges. Biker gangs have prospects. And they have like the formal meetings where only the official, full-on, vetted, colored Hells Angels are allowed to sit at the table. And then they have the informal shit. I mean, it's like, okay. That's all I could think. It's all I could picture is all these asshats with Surf, King asshat, sitting right at the head of the freaking Sons of Anarchy table with the Reaper carved in it. That's
disclaimer, he's not saying all frat boys are asshats. He's not saying all biker gangs are asshats.
I'm definitely not, because I don't even think I know a frat guy. Like it's not part of my world.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure that, I've known people that were in fraternities.
Right.
Of course I have. But I don't move in that world, And I got to be honest, this particular fraternity, and I think I include this later, so it's probably going to be repeated, but Ronald Reagan belonged to this.
Tau Kappa Epsilon?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is one of those old school, it's like the Bushes and the Skull and Bones Society.
Right.
This is like one of those old fraternities that goes back with a lot of tradition. I think there's a lot of difference between that
and what's happening now.
And at least I think there's been new fraternities and sororities that have been created in this new modern world.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know.
They don't hold the higher What's the word I'm looking for? Traditions that matter as much.
Right. Like,
I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, but it's the only thing that came to mind.
well, what I do know is I don't know how much this applies to fraternities, but I think it really applies to both. The secret societies like Skull and Bones, which is a real thing, and these early traditional fraternities, it was really like who you were.
Yeah.
Because your dad was a Tau epilepsy.
Tau Kappa Epsilon.
That one. Yeah. He was one of those.
Epilepsy.
And so you better be one of those. And it was
Sorry.
It was like a given because you were going to go to the same college that your dad went to.
Yeah, and if you didn't pledge into it, you were in trouble.
We were probably out of the family.
Yeah.
But if you did, you're going to be president of the United States. I mean, and I don't say that without some backing. It's like the Skull and Bones shit,
Yeah.
and I don't know how fraternities compare, but like the Skull and Bones shit, if you get into that, you're going to be made into
something,
whatever you want out of life. President, the owner of some huge corporation.
Yep.
It's happened over and over again. So anyway, so what happened next didn't take place at a party. There was no music, no chaos, no alcohol-soaked blur. This was daylight. This was conversation, and this was the space where Surf believed that, I should say, what was this dumbass's full name? Surfabino?
No.
Surfa, some Italian sounding made up name. Serafino Barnaby. Serafino Barnaby believed that he had control. So the gathering took place the day after the toga party in what was I think most likely a formal Tau Kappa Epsilon chapter meeting.
Good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But it functioned the same way socially. So he was with fraternity associated friends, maybe drinking beer, talking, posturing. I don't know. But this was his arena. So according to testimony, the conversation revolved almost entirely around sex. Who had done what, and who had been with whom, and who had status, and Surf was leading it. Witnesses describe him as bragging openly about his sex life, presenting himself as so experienced, dominant, desirable. He talked the way someone talks when they believe the room is buying what they're selling. And this is important because this asshat had spent weeks carefully constructing a version of himself inside that social circle. Confident, connected, successful with women, someone worth listening to. And it matters a lot. So when Thomas Walton spoke up, Walton had been on the porch with Sarah the night before, and he had heard what she said. And in the context of this conversation, where Surf was inflating his sexual resume, Walton repeated, quote, "He's all right, but I've had better." That single sentence detonated the room. The reaction was immediate. The other men laughed. They teased Surf. They turned his own storytelling against him. In an instant,
I can hear it now.
Oh, yeah. The narrative flipped. So Asshat wasn't the one defining himself anymore. Sarah was. And her assessment was not flattering.
Yep.
This wasn't about romance. It wasn't about feelings. It was about status collapse. Witnesses testified that his demeanor changed sharply. He became agitated, then infuriated. The confidence drained out of him and was replaced with something defensive and sharp. And then he did something revealing. He denied having sex with Sarah. Not casually, not jokingly. He corrected the record.
Wow.
He told the group that he and Sarah had only engaged in oral sex.
He erased a notch on his bedpost.
Yeah. So think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
The night before, he had publicly rejected her while trying to pursue other women. And now in front of the same social circle, he was walking back that intimacy entirely. So this wasn't about protecting her reputation. This was damage control. If Sarah hadn't really been with him, then her opinion didn't matter.
Yep.
If the relationship could be minimized, then the insult could be neutralized. This is how fragile identities behave when they're threatened. He wasn't reacting like someone embarrassed. He was reacting like someone whose entire self-image depended on the approval of that room. And that's the key distinction. Most people experience rejection and move on. Some people feel humiliated and withdraw. Others become angry. But when someone has built their entire identity on an illusion, on storytelling, exaggeration, performance, any challenge to that illusion becomes intolerable. Because if one piece falls, then the rest is exposed.
Like Jenga.
Yeah. This wasn't a breakup. It wasn't jealousy, not in the ordinary sense. This was narcissistic injury, a public wound inflicted by someone he believed he controlled. And importantly, none of this happened in secret. The laughter, the teasing, the anger, all of it was witnessed. All of it was remembered. And all of it became part of the record. At this point, nothing illegal has happened, but something has definitely changed.
Those are the types of things that in drunken instances, that's the only thing that's remembered.
Yeah, but
is the tarnishing.
But to normal people, and I'm not saying I'm normal, but
I'm far from normal.
I've researched normal people, and
I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Exactly. But, you know, for normal people, after you go out drunk, you usually are like, I made an ass of myself last night. I'm humiliated by what I did.
Yeah.
And then and, you know, maybe something is said by a drunk and you're insulted by it or whatever. But, you know, for normal people, and I've been in these situations many times in my life where, you know, somebody's been like, man, I'm sorry, I was a dick last night.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, you were. You know, I probably don't want to hang out with you when you're drinking again, or never drink tequila around me again, or whatever. But it's done. It's gone.
Yeah.
This asshat, I mean, you're going to find out it is so much bigger than you can even imagine. But his whole identity is based around this. I can have sex with any girl on campus, and I'm the king of the fraternity, and I'm the most important human in this whole fraternity.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was like world ending to him.
Right.
The image that he'd been cultivating had cracked in front of the very people that he was trying to impress. And for someone living inside a house of cards, that kind of crack isn't small. It's existential. So next, we're going to move back into the timeline, away from words and into actions, because after this gathering, Surf didn't withdraw. He didn't recalibrate. He doubled down. And the consequences of that would be irreversible. So before we move into the night that Sarah was killed, we need to slow the timeline down just a little bit, because cases like this rarely hinge on any single or explosive moment. They turn on what happens in the spaces that we can't document. So here's what the record gives us and where it falls silent. The toga party happened. I researched the shit out of this, trying to figure all of this stuff out. I believe that the toga party happened on a Saturday night.
Okay.
Because typical official fraternity meetings are held on Sunday. And from what I understood, a lot...
Is that why they call it church?
Well, probably.
Okay.
And from what I can understand, a lot of the reason for that is because at those, they go over the conquests of the weekend partying from Friday and Saturday night. So I feel pretty confident. I know that the party happened the weekend before. And in researching how this fraternity shit works, it sounds like they usually have their formal meeting on Sunday. So ipso facto, I think the toga party happened on Saturday night, which in 1993, I think was the 19th of September. And then that's when
I want to look that up now just to see if you're right.
So after that, the official trail fades. There's no police reports, no journals, no messages to reconstruct intent or tone. And this was 1993. We had no social media posts to go back and look through. So silence was still fair normal. What we're left with is inference grounded in behavior and in my insanity to research fraternity shit that doesn't really matter, but it intrigues me. So from the fraternity gathering in the early morning hours of, I think, the 19th, or not the early morning, but sometimes Sunday morning, there's a narrow window of time, just a few days before September 22nd.
Okay.
So it's long enough for resentment to settle in, long enough for embarrassment to harden into something more personal, long enough for someone invested in control to feel the need to reset the dynamic. And here, clarity matters. There's no court document that says Asshat bought Sara gifts. No testimony stating that he apologized. No witness describing a specific conversation where he talked her back into anything. But that absence doesn't mean that nothing happened. It means nothing was recorded. And I say that because what is documented is the outcome. Sara was with Asshat again on the night that she was killed. And this was just days after being publicly dismissed, just days after his anger was visible to others, just days after her words punctured his image. Sara had alternatives. She had a dorm, she had a roommate, she had other friends, yet she returned to his space. So to me, that doesn't suggest fear. It suggests some kind of repair. Because people don't re-enter situations like that without some form of recalibration taking place. Sometimes it's an apology, sometimes it's reassurance, sometimes it's simply a shift in tone, a reframing of what happened as a misunderstanding rather than a warning. And there's no doubt that this piece of shit was unbelievably manipulative and very, very good at it. So this would not be difficult for him to accomplish at all.
Right.
And this is where age and experience matter, not as blame, but as reality. Sara was 17. She was new to independence, new to adult relationships for sure, but probably relatively new to relationships in general. New to the idea that charm and cruelty can coexist in the same person. And Surf had already learned how to recover ground when it was lost. Nothing in the record suggests that Sara believed she was in any kind of danger. Nothing suggests that she felt threatened. And that is exactly how manipulation works. It doesn't feel like coercion. It feels like resolution. From everything that we can reasonably infer, the days between the formal fraternity gathering and the night of the murder were a period where proximity was restored, tension was softened, and normalcy was represented. Not through force, through persuasion. That doesn't make Sara careless, it makes her human. Giving someone another chance, especially when they apologize, minimize, or reframe, is one of the most common decisions that people make. Especially young people, especially in unfamiliar environments, especially when the surrounding social world keeps reinforcing familiarity, especially when this slights occurred when the other person was drinking. It's like I said, a normal response is to say, I get it, you were drunk, you were being an ass, whatever, now you're saying you're sorry.
Yeah.
So by the time Sara agreed to come over again, whatever warning signs existed had already been quieted. Not erased, muted. And that's why this window matters, because Sara did not walk into danger knowingly. She walked back into what had been made to feel normal again. The threat wasn't obvious. It was relational. So, for Oh, if there is like a documentary or anything on a story that we're covering, I usually try to watch it. And there is one on this case. It is on the series, I think it's Your Worst Nightmare. It's covered on a series, Your Worst Nightmare. And in that, they definitely display that he gave her like a teddy bear and, apologized and all this. There's nothing I could find in the record to support that. I think that likely they made the same inference that I did, and they just put it in there.
Right.
But something happened, because you don't go from being treated that way to going right back over to stay with him unless some conversation has occurred.
Right.
So September 21st, 1993, it does not stand out in the record because of anything dramatic. It stands out because of how little it tells us. By every available indication, it was likely an ordinary weekday for college students in late September. Classes, studying, wandering campus, killing time between obligations, and I think it was a Tuesday. It was either a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
It's always a Tuesday.
Always a Tuesday. So it's the kind of day that blurs together when you're 18, or in Sarah's case, still 17, and learning how to live on your own. There's no schedule preserved for Sarah that day, no class list, no notes about where she ate lunch, no witness describing her mood or plans earlier in the afternoon. What we know begins later. Sarah was seen by her roommate, Nikki Van Belkom, at Rogers Hall sometime that afternoon. They made plans to meet up again later in the day, and that meeting never happened. At some point that evening, Sarah called Nikki and said that she would be staying the night with Surf at the West 48th Street house. The call matters, not because it was unusual, but because it wasn't. It fit her already established pattern. When Sarah stayed off campus, she called. That behavior reflects normal accountability, not secrecy. Nothing about that call raised any kind of alarm in real time, because nothing about it broke the routine. After the call, the record goes quiet again. We don't know what Sarah did in the hours between leaving the dorm and arriving at the house. We don't know what conversations took place. We don't know what assurances were given or what version of the relationship was presented to her that night. On douchebag's side, the documented portion of his day doesn't begin until later, probably because the son of a bitch probably didn't get out of bed till 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Probably.
But that evening, he attended a Tau Kappa Epsilon related meeting. And this is why I had to go into the formal, informal, all the bullshit, because this meeting, and when I was researching this and I was checking the dates, and I was like, what do these people meet every other freaking day?
Yeah.
So the formal meeting happened on the Sunday, like I said, and this was a pledge meeting. And so apparently the pledges have their own meetings where they learn like the history of the fraternity and all that kind of bullshit. And then the official business occurs at the official meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. So this one on the 21st was a pledge meeting, much less formal. And so we know that he went to that meeting, and while he was gone, we know that Sarah was at the West 48th Street house. And that detail is important because Sarah was already there. After the meeting ended, fraternity pledge William Gee drove douchebag back to the house, arriving shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning. I think actually by the time they arrived, it was like closer to 1:45. And in the early minutes of September the 22nd, so Gee stayed only briefly. He testified that when he left around 1:45, Sarah was still alive and in Surf's bedroom. That is the last confirmed sighting of her alive. There is no evidence of conflict at that moment, no report of distress, no indication that anything appeared wrong to the outside observer. And that's where September the 22nd comes to an end. We don't know exactly how Surf regained Sarah's trust. We don't know how the earlier hours of the day unfolded. We do not know what was said, promised, minimized, reframed. What we do know is this. Sara spent the night where she said she would. She followed her routine. She was alive at 1:45 in the morning. Everything that comes next happens after that moment. And from this point forward, the timeline no longer belongs to the ordinary college life. It belongs to the crime. So, again, 1:45 a.m. on September 22nd, just barely September 22nd, Sara Wisnosky was alive. And that matters because everything that follows unfolds in a narrow window, measured not in days, but in minutes and hours, instead inside a shared house where other people were present, awake, and paying attention. What happened next was not silent. It was loud, erratic, and increasingly difficult to explain away. And before I go into this, keep in mind, there's a whole shit ton of people that say this guy is innocent and he did not murder Sara.
Okay.
However,
are they all his followers?
Probably.
Okay.
Just before 2 o'clock in the morning, Surf returned to the West 48th Street house after being driven home from a fraternity pledge meeting by William Gee. Sara was there inside his room. Gee left at 1:45. She was still alive at that time. So shortly after 2 o'clock, one of Barnaby's housemates, Michael Christopher Bain, was woken up by music blasting from Derek's room directly below him. Not just music, very loud music. The song was identified later as Head Like a Hole by Nine Inch Nails. Bain stomped on the floor to signal that the volume needed to come down. Instead, it got louder. Bain and another housemate, David Worth, went downstairs and pounded on Dipshit's door for several minutes. There was no answer. The door was locked. Then the situation shifted. Sometime between 2 o'clock and 2:30, douchebag suddenly burst into the room of another housemate, Troy. How the frick do you say that name? Troy Manglikmont? Troy.
Let's just call him Troy.
Yeah, Troy. His tone was described as strong and forceful. He demanded that Troy move his car because it was blocking Surf's vehicle in the driveway. When Troy hesitated, Surf tried to take the keys himself. He couldn't get the car started. Troy eventually moved it. What followed was not calm. Surf backed his car out in what witnesses described as a frantic state, striking the side of the neighboring house and nearly colliding with another vehicle before pulling away, quote, really fast and leaving the property. Around 2:30 a.m., another housemate, Justin Dewall, returned home and began searching for his dog, which he couldn't find. While looking, Dewall knocked on Surf's door. It opened only slightly, and Surf was completely naked. Dewall described him as wide-eyed, open-mouthed, expressionless, appearing unable to focus or respond normally. No explanation was offered. The door closed. So just so we're clear on the time frame, she was alive at 1:45.
Yeah.
He is standing in his room naked without her there at 2:30.
Yeah.
So in 45 minutes, she's gone.
He backed out, hit a house, hit a car.
But he didn't do it. Yeah, that's important. It's going to become more important in the next episode, but it's important to explain my position on this case because I'm not sorry the son of a bitch is dead. All right, so I've said that. So by morning time, by like human morning time, Surf, not college morning time, like normal human morning time, Surf was back at approximately 7:30 in the morning. David Worth left for the day and found Surf asleep on the living room couch. When asked why he wasn't in his room, Surf only said it was, quote, a long effed up story, end quote. As Worth walked to
That sounds innocent.
Yeah. As Worth walked to his truck, he noticed a single leather shoe near the back of Derek's car. Not understanding its significance, he tossed it onto the back porch. It was later identified as Sara's shoe. The matching shoe was still inside Surf's room. Later that morning, around 9:30, Derek called fraternity pledge Eric Scott Anderson and asked him to bring over a blanket because, quote, he was cold. When Anderson arrived, he noticed something else. Surf's waterbed had no sheets. That was unusual. As the day continued, and that's especially unusual for a waterbed.
Waterbed,
because they're not comfortable to sleep on without sheets.
No, they're not a whole lot of comfortable to sleep on with sheets.
No, they freaking suck ass. Without sheets, you stick to the damn things. And obviously, I've slept on a waterbed without sheets, and I slept on a waterbed right after you like fill the son of a bitch up, and you haven't given it 6 weeks to heat up, and so you literally freeze your ass off all night long. Yeah. I hate waterbeds. Yeah. Anyway, so as the day continued, Surf's behavior did not stabilize. In the early afternoon, DeWall's girlfriend saw him carrying a duffel bag and a surfboard out of his bedroom. At approximately 2:45 in the afternoon, he offered a ride to another pledge, Richard Payton. Before leaving, he handed Payton the surfboard and asked him to store it in his room because he was, quote, tired of carrying it around. Inside the car, Payton noticed a really bad smell coming from the back seat. Surf said that it was his laundry, pointing to a large closed duffel bag behind them, and then began talking rapidly, erratically, babbling in a way that Payton later described as an attempt to distract him from the odor. During this period, Surf also asked multiple frat members for money. In the early evening, around 5:30 or 6, Surf called Eric Anderson again, and this time he asked a strange question. Had Anderson, quote, heard anything? When Anderson asked what the hell he meant, Surf said, oh, nothing. Then he offered an explanation preemptively. He said he was leaving town for a few days to work with his father. He was not. Instead, Derek Barnaby left the area, first heading to Maryland and then to Ohio. By the time night fell on the 22nd, Sara Wisnosky had not returned to her dorm, and the ordinary expectations of college life, missed plans, late nights, casual expectations, were about to collapse under the weight of what had already happened. But at this point in the timeline, no one yet knew how bad it was. They only knew that something was wrong, and all of it was this freaking asshat, because this is not...
All of it was wrong.
None of what I just described is innocent in any way, shape, or form. So early Wednesday evening, September 22nd, 1993, the uncertainty ended. Just after 6 p.m., Sara Wisnosky's body was discovered in the Lafayette River. The location was a quiet residential bend near the 5000 block of Mayflower Road in Norfolk. Backyards facing the water, wooden bulkheads, and short steps leading down from private yards into what is more... So this is strange as shit to me, and I guess it's because I'm from Wyoming, where if it's not in a cup, we don't have water. But in Virginia, the whole thing is water. And, I mean, what they describe as a creek is like bigger than any river in Wyoming. I mean, the son of a bitch is like, it's freaking way far across this thing.
Creeks in Wyoming you can jump across.
Yeah, and this isn't even a creek because it doesn't flow anywhere. It's like a cove.
Oh.
You know?
Okay.
So it doesn't flow. The river is flowing around it, and this is like a cove that they call a creek. So I want to be clear that we're not talking about like a 2-inch deep Wyoming creek or crick, whatever you say.
Yeah.
And honestly, where all over the United States that I've been, cricks or creeks are little running streams.
Yeah, little babbling brooks, if you will.
Yeah, that's not the case here. And it's important because
This was a significant body of water, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially a cove tied to the ocean, because I did do some research and confirmed, and I'll talk about it here in a minute, but tidal currents are affecting the flow of this. And since the water's not flowing, it's very similar to a situation like where Lauren Agee was found.
I was just about to ask you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so kind of set the scene there. So
you're trying to say it was hard for her to float there because there wasn't a current to take her there?
Well, I'll get there in a minute.
Okay.
So
foreshadowing.
And that's perfectly fine. So we've got, but this is a residential area. Like I said, backyards facing the water, wooden bulkheads. A lot of these houses have docks, and there's boats parked all along the waterways here and stuff. And short steps leading down from private yards into what they call a creek, but it's more like a cove.
Right.
And a woman walking her dog noticed something floating near the bank. And at first she thought it was a mannequin, which is always the way that this is described. And I think it's because the human brain has to rationalize that it
doesn't want it to be
anything other than what you really think it is.
Yeah.
But when she realized that it could be a person, she flagged down a nearby officer and led them to the water. And Sara was found floating face down, nude, close to the shore. The scene itself told a story before any report was written. She'd been in the water for hours. She had been injured. This was no accident. A blood-stained washcloth lay nearby. With Sara's body, officers found her Heritage High School class ring engraved with the initials SJW. And, I mean, that's one of the saddest damn things because, anybody graduated high school, if you got a class ring, it's one of those things where you're like excited to have it, especially if you like belong to sports and shit, which I didn't, but... Mm-hmm. And you wear it, and maybe it's different for guys than girls, but, and it's not something that you wear for years and years and years. It just really makes it sink in just how young this kid was because she was still wearing her class ring,
Yeah.
And
the novelty hadn't worn off yet.
Exactly. And the ring ended any uncertainty about who she was. So within hours, Sara Wisnosky, 17 years old, newly arrived at Old Dominion University, was identified. So the geography here matters, and you know me, it drives me crazy. So Barnaby's rooming house sat less than a mile away. As the nutcase that I am, I had to try to get an idea of this area because I'm trying to figure out where this comes from, why he's innocent. And me personally, I have a big problem with anybody innocent being put to death. And so the insinuation that this douchebag was innocent, I had to understand. And so I Google Earth the crap out of this area. And
you and your maps.
Yeah, me and my maps. And so I located 48th Street where I don't know the address of this house.
Where the house, okay.
So, but I Googled, I pulled up 48th on Google Earth and I looked through the houses, and at first I mapped it from the farthest house away to where her body was found, and it was roughly a mile. And then I did like the street view thing, and it was a teeny tiny little house, and in all of the research it says this was a multi-story home, so it had to be at least 2 stories. So I found the closest or the farthest away 2-story house to the waterway, and it was, I think, about 600 yards from the water. So, and depending on where he put her in the water and all this kind of stuff, but from that house, which is the farthest from the water I could find, to the closest place that he could have put her in the water, it would have taken about a minute to get there. It's literally 48th Street, West 48th, dead ends at that water. At that cove, it's like Mill something Creek is what they call it. It dead ends at it. So you literally could run right down to the end of the street, toss her into the water.
Be back and naked in 45 minutes.
Easily. It's a 2-minute drive maximum. And he was not driving slow. So
not if he's tearing up the neighborhood.
It's 600 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it said you walk it in, I think it said like 5 minutes to walk it. It's a couple blocks. So I just found that important to the whole he's innocent story. So, and it's also important to know, as you alluded to before, that this section of Lafayette River is tidal. It's not fast moving. And on the day that Sara was found, I looked up the tidal charts. So the water rose and fell predictably. A body placed in the creek earlier that morning would not need to travel far to end up where she was discovered. And from the place where I think he could have likely put her in the water, she would have floated about 200 yards across the cove, essentially is all it would have taken, is for her to float across the cove. It's also possible that he drove around the cove and then threw her in on the other side of it.
Okay.
I don't know. And I'm not going to say allegedly, because the son of a bitch was found guilty and executed for this crime. So it's important to note, though, she was not found in some distant place. She was found close to where her life had last been normal, close to where she had trusted someone, close to where the last ordinary decisions of her life were made. And that is where this story must pause, because before there were courtrooms and verdicts, before theories and arguments and legal language, there was a 17-year-old girl whose life ended in silence along a neighborhood riverbank. She was not reckless. She was not naive. She was not asking for anything. She was young, excited, learning how to be an adult in a world that did not protect her. The danger she encountered did not announce itself. It didn't look like a threat. It looked like familiarity. And by the time the water carried her into view, it was already too late. So that is where we end today. Not with answers, not with expectations, but with Sara, remembered as she was before she became evidence. A daughter, a student, a 17-year-old standing at the beginning of her life. And that is the part that must never be forgotten. By the end of September 22nd, 93, the story changed, whether anyone was ready for it or not. What had begun as a missing freshman became something undeniable, something irreversible. Up until that point, there were still explanations that people could reach for. Missed plans, late nights, a college student choosing not to come home. But once Sara Wisnosky was found in the Lafayette River, those explanations no longer held. This was not confusion or miscommunication. This was not someone who'd wandered off. This was violence. And it stood in stark contrast to everything that had come before it. Just days earlier, she'd been living an ordinary college life, moving between her dorm, her friends, and a social world that felt familiar enough to trust. She made plans. She changed them. She checked in. She assumed she would wake up the next morning and continue becoming who she was meant to be. The person responsible for her death did not announce himself as a threat. He did not appear as dangerous. He existed inside her normal. That is the hardest truth to sit with, because stories like this do not hinge on obvious warning signs or dramatic turning points. They hinge on proximity, access, and trust. On the moments where nothing seems wrong until everything is. And by the time Sara's body was pulled from the water, the ordinary world that she'd been navigating was gone. What remained was a silence heavy enough to demand answers, but not yet ready to give them. This episode is not about conclusions. It's about context and how quickly normal life can collapse, and how easily harm can hide behind familiarity, and how a 17-year-old girl doing nothing extraordinary, nothing reckless, found herself at the center of something that she could not have foreseen. We're going to continue this story. We're going to examine what followed. We will talk about what the evidence revealed and what it didn't. But for now, we stop here. We stop with Sara, not as a case, not as a headline, but as a person whose life deserved far more than it was given. Before we begin this victim tribute, I want to pause for a moment. When we tell these stories, especially stories involving young lives, we're careful about how we enter that space. This isn't about heightening drama or pulling focus. It's about creating room to remember someone as they were before everything narrowed down to a single night. As part of that effort, we're continuing our collaboration with the J.J. Hawk Band, whose music we use intentionally during Select Victim Tributes. They're kind enough to offer their work as tribute to these precious souls. It is chosen not to explain the story, but to sit alongside it, quietly, respectfully, and without intrusion. The song you're about to hear is called Whispers of the Night. It's a piece that lives in uncertainty, in that space between presence and absence, between being seen and being lost. It carries a sense of youth, vulnerability, and the haunting quiet that follows when answers don't come. As this music plays beneath the tribute, we ask you to listen gently, not just to what happened, but to who Sara was, a young woman still becoming herself, still imagining what came next. This is Whispers of the Night by the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Sara Wisnosky. Before Sara Wisnosky became a case, she was in the middle of becoming a person. She was 17 years old, newly independent, newly on her own, and standing in that brief, fragile space between childhood structure and adult freedom. She left Lynchburg for Old Dominion University, not to escape anything, but to begin something. And the distinction matters because Sara arrived at college the way countless young people do, hopeful, curious, and trusting that the world she was stepping into operated on the same basic rules she'd always known. She believed that people were mostly what they appeared to be, that familiarity meant safety, that tomorrow was assumed. She lived in a dorm room that was still settling into routine. She shared space and schedules. She made plans and she adjusted them. She checked in when she stayed out. She moved through her days with the quiet confidence of someone who expected to be seen again. There was nothing reckless about that. There was nothing unusual. Sara was doing exactly what college invites young people to do: stretch outward, test independence, and learn who they are without constant supervision. She was navigating new friendships, new rhythms, and new autonomy with the tools that she had at the pace that she was capable of. She laughed, she socialized, she explored, she trusted, and that trust was not a flaw. It was ordinary. When violence enters a story like this, it has a way of distorting perspective. It pulls focus toward the end and flattens everything that came before it. A life becomes a moment. A person becomes an outcome. That is not who Sara was. She was not defined by danger. She was not marked by fear. She was not living on the edge of catastrophe. She was motion. She was anticipation. She was possibility still unfolding. In the episodes ahead, we'll talk about what was taken from her and how the system attempted to measure, explain, and respond to that loss. We'll talk about evidence, interpretation, and the weight of irreversible decisions. But here, at the close of part 1, it is enough to remember this. Sara Wisnosky was entitled to time. Time to grow, time to misjudge, time to learn, time to change her mind. She deserved more days on that campus, more calls home, more plans that shifted, more ordinary mornings she never imagined she wouldn't see. Before the arguments, before the evidence, before the verdicts, there was a young woman who believed the world she was entering was fundamentally safe. That belief did not make her weak. It made her human. And that is who we carry forward.
In the stillness, they softly sigh. haunted by the night, they'll never die.
So that's where we're going to leave part one. In this episode, we focused on who Sara was, the world that she had just begun to build, and the sequence of events that placed her in harm's way. We haven't reached any conclusions yet. Well, some of us have, but... and we haven't reached judgment. Again,
Some of us have.
Some of us have. What we've done is lay the groundwork, because understanding context matters before evidence ever enters the room.
It does. Cases like this remind us how quickly ordinary moments can become irreversible, and how important it is to slow down and understand the steps that lead there. Sara wasn't just part of a case file, she was a young woman whose life was still unfolding.
Before we go, we want to thank you for spending this time with us, and we also want to ask for your help in keeping this work going. If you want to get involved directly, the Dark Dialogue Collective is our volunteer boots-on-the-ground program for people who want to help with research, outreach, and advocacy. This is not a donation tier. It's for active participation.
You can also support victims and their stories through our Adopt a Victim program, or learn more about the Dark Dialogue Collective. Information for both is available at darkdialogue.com, where you'll also find our victim blog posts and case write-ups.
For ongoing support, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/darkdialoguepod. For one-time support, visit us on ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/darkdialogue. And for long-form writing and case updates, follow us on our Substack at darkdialoguecrime.substack.com.
If you have information, questions, or need to reach us directly, you can email info@darkdialogue.com.
Be sure to check out the other shows in the Dark Dialogue Network: Rocky Mountain Reckoning, Distilled, Unraveled Truths, Gallows and Gunfights, and of course, Shadow Chat Sessions.
And wherever you're listening or watching, please like, share, subscribe, leave a review, and turn on notifications or ring the bell. Those actions help this work reach much more people.
Until next time, take care of each other, keep listening, keep digging, and as always, keep the dialogue alive.